Welcome to the Routing for Success podcast, the show where we interview today's top logistics professionals, giving them a platform to share their stories and best practices. Today, we are talking with Jason Larsen. Jason is an independent service provider for FedEx Ground, operating an average of 160 daily routes, dispatched from 8 different terminals. Jason has managed to grow his business aggressively these past 7 years and is showing no signs of slowing down. Jason has a goal of adding another 2 CSAs this calendar year. In this episode, we discuss Jason's path from being a brand new startup contractor, having never even heard of FedEx contracting, to being one of the top contractors in the network today. Jason details his strategy for taking over distressed operations, building a strong management team, the importance of understanding the culture and communication styles within an individual terminal before committing to going into it, and much, much more. I am pleased to present to you Jason Larsen. All right, we're here with Jason Larsen. Jason, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
So we're here to talk about your FedEx business. Before we get into any of that, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your professional background and what were you doing before you had ever even heard of FedEx Ground contracting?
Yeah, no, great question. I'll talk a little bit about me and my wife. We're in this together, so we're business partners in all this, and we have a very similar background. We both have undergraduate degrees in accounting. We went into the business world. We both worked for fairly large corporations, Fortune 50 companies for a while. I also dabbled in the small startup world for a little bit too, a little bit of real estate, things like that. And then we both decided to go back and get our master's business administration, different universities. This was all before we met and got married. But yeah, we both got our MBAs and then both ended up in Austin, Texas, working at Dell. So we worked at Dell both worked there for about 5 years before we got into the FedEx world. So we went and, after about 5 years or so, started thinking, what do we want to do with our lives? Do we want to continue in the corporate route? Do we want to do something else? And 2 of my wife's brothers actually bought routes up in Washington State. And so that's actually how we first heard about FedEx contracting. Before that, never heard about it before, right? We're like probably the majority of the population thought that all the people delivering our home and ground packages were FedEx employees. But yeah, after talking to them and hearing a little bit more about the business, the world of FedEx, things like that, it piqued our interest and we started looking for routes to purchase here in the Austin area.
And what year was that you had heard about it, became intrigued by the idea, and started looking at FedEx?
Yeah, and 2015 is about the year we started looking around. 2016 is when we got real serious. We found a few people who were looking to sell in the Austin area in 2016. The first couple contractors we reached out to, the numbers didn't quite jive as much as we'd want. And the broker we had reached out to that was helping sell those routes actually told us, he's like, I think I have someone who he's not actually selling right now, but might be interested for the right price. And so we actually got in touch with him and we were able to come up with a mutually beneficial price for both of us and bought him out and got him into retirement a little earlier than he might have expected.
And that was in 2016.
That's correct. Yeah. June of 2016 is when we closed. So we're coming up on 7 years now this June.
So accounting background, you'd worked with some startups, dabbled in real estate. Both you and your spouse went and got your MBAs. You worked for Dell, so corporate world. And then you had heard about FedEx contracting. Jason, that's a kind of a story that I've heard from a few other people, successful corporate background, and then you want to have a business of your own. What turned you on about the FedEx model? I mean, there's a million different things that you could go do, and you chose to do FedEx Ground contracting. What turned you on to the model?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. We had been looking at quite a few different businesses, anything from franchise models to just other small businesses. I think what really intrigued us was having that FedEx brand behind us, knowing that we had a multi-billion-dollar corporation who is doing a lot of the sales and marketing, things that are not my strong suit for sure. And knowing that they were going to do that and let my wife and I focus strictly on operations, we thought that was a good deal. And it intrigued us to be able to have somewhat of, I don't know if we'd say full control over where we're going and what we're doing for our business, because we know that FedEx has lots of rules and regulations that we need to follow, and they're the 800-pound gorilla, as we could say, right, in the relationship. But that being said, we do have quite a bit of flexibility to be able to do things how we want to, and we're excited about that.
So tell us about those first days as you got into the business. So you used a broker to connect you to the seller, and then there's an entire process through that. But then the day comes where the reins are officially handed over. You are the contractor. Tell us about those early days. What were those like?
Yeah, the early days weren't too bad, to be honest. So we picked up about 20 routes in the North Austin terminal. And we were lucky to have a really, really good BC who stayed on board, and he's still with us. He'd been working 10, 11 years already with FedEx as a driver, or with a contractor as a driver, and kind of worked his way up through the company. So honestly, this probably isn't the case for most people, but we had a really smooth transition. We had really good drivers in place. We had a great BC. It was pretty smooth sailing from the get-go. Also, it was the old CSP model versus the ISP model. There was probably a little more room for mistakes within that old contract than there are now. So that probably helped a little bit. It was a pretty smooth transition, to be honest. I know that might not be what everyone wants to hear, but for us, it was.
Well, I think that there's actually a lesson in there, which is, do as much due diligence as you can. And you had mentioned that you actually looked at several other business opportunities to acquire FedEx routes, and you turned them down just for a number of different reasons. The numbers didn't work or otherwise. And you finally landed on a business that not only did the numbers work, but there was a structure that you could get placed into that was going to help you be successful from day one. I feel like there's a lesson in there, particularly for our people listening in who haven't actually started with FedEx yet, but they're thinking of getting into it.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, again, now that we've been doing this, we would be much more willing to take on operations, either whether it's, open areas that FedEx is offering, or whether it's, contractors that are failing and need to sell quickly. We're comfortable enough in the space that we could take over those types of operations. At the beginning, we weren't, right? So I think, to your point, if you're doing this for the very first time, I think it is smart, maybe, and I don't think we overpaid by any stretch, but we paid probably a little bit more. Well, we did pay a little bit more than what we were going to originally for the first operations we were looking at. But again, like you're saying, I think it's worth getting something that's well run, good people in place to start out with, kind of lessen that risk at the very beginning. And then, once you're established, I think it's a little easier to be able to go and swallow a little bit of risk later on down the road.
So what did you do from there? So you get into the business, you have a really good BC, a good group of drivers on staff. It was about 20 routes in North Austin, and that was in June of 2016. So you got a taste of the business, you began operating. How long did it take for you to decide that you wanted to continue to grow?
Yeah, it took us a few years, to be honest. We liked what we were doing. We enjoyed working with the routes in Austin. And honestly, we saw quite a bit of growth. For people familiar with the Austin, Texas area, there was a lot of population growth, e-commerce growth, things like that leading up to 2020. We had lots of corporations moving headquarters here. I mean, I think for 2 or 3 years, there was a net of 150, 160 people moving to Austin per day on average. So honestly, we saw quite a bit of growth in those first couple of years without needing to look into expansion at all. So, I mean, we went from 20 routes, and I bet within those first 3 years, we probably expanded to 40 or 45 routes. Most of it organic. There were a couple routes that we picked up when FedEx forced contractors to go to 5 routes or more, 500 stops or more. Again, back in the day when they're switching to the ISP model. But again, the majority of it was organic. So again, we were able to see quite a bit of growth just honestly being lucky and being in the right place at the right time in Austin. It wasn't until we started hitting scale within the North Austin terminal back in, about 2019 that we really started thinking, okay, what are our options? Because we really did like the FedEx contracting model. We liked working with FedEx, and we started thinking, what's next, right? Because we can't continue to gobble up areas in Austin without causing scale concerns for them. And so that at that point, that's when we started putting a new strategy together for growth.
And what was that new strategy?
Yeah, the new strategy for us was putting a good team in place. So the BC that we had talked about earlier, who had been running the full operation, we promoted him to kind of a regional manager, growth manager role, and had another BC come in underneath him to enable us to be able to run that operation and also to be able to grow from there. And so what we did is we started applying for open areas within the FedEx world, right? So on Build a Ground Biz, you can go on and look to see what P&D routes are available, what line haul routes are available. So we started going in and really, I think we had a good strategy in place on how to do it, but we weren't 100% sure on what it was going to look like, how long it was going to take. So we took a bit of a shotgun approach when we started applying. And honestly, we started applying pretty much everywhere within the country just to see what kind of response we were going to get. Because again, we had never done it before. We didn't know what was going to happen. And we were surprised at how quickly we were getting calls back for AIM meetings and interest in us expanding. The first opportunity that we had, we actually turned down. It was a little small to be able to support a full-time manager. And again, with us being remote, we weren't able to really manage it well. So we turned down the first opportunity that we had. And then the second opportunity that came by was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So that was our first location that we expanded outside of the Austin terminal.
And how many routes was that in Wisconsin?
It was about 10 to 12, depending on the day.
Okay. And was that a similar type of situation where there was a BC or a manager already in place and you felt, or was there any, did you kind of have to clean house before you went in?
No, so that was a little bit of a unique situation. So when you're looking at any of the open areas, there's typically two scenarios that you're looking at. One is a contractor, unfortunately, is being asked to leave completely. And in that case, usually there are some drivers that are left behind that are needing jobs and would like to continue in routes. The second scenario you'll generally see is a contractor has gotten a little bit too big, has run into a few problems, or they hit scale and FedEx kind of forces them to cut back. And so they go and carve off an area. And at that point, there's not usually a lot of drivers that will come along with something like that. The Oshkosh opportunity actually it was the first scenario where unfortunately a contractor just wasn't able to fill the contractual duties and was asked to leave. So the majority of the drivers ended up staying for us. There was not a set BC in place. And so we actually sent our regional manager that we have, we sent him up there for about 2 months, actually. He was kind enough to go up there. We ended up sending his family with him. It was the summertime, so they all went up there for a couple months and really got the operation up and running, made sure that they had good people in place. We hired a BC from one of the drivers after we got to know all of the drivers, see what kind of talent pool we had there. And then we're able to train him and get him to take over the operation full time at that point.
That's great. So you went on Build a Ground Biz, bought the business in Wisconsin, or there was no purchase. I mean, this was just you submitted like an RFI, and it was just granted to you because they needed someone to fill that spot.
Yeah, so it's just
right?
An open area. Yeah.
So you sent your BC, was your BC, but promoted to more of a regional management type position to go up there for a few months with their family. That's neat that they had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah,
really
thanks to Airbnb, right. That kind of stuff's a little bit easier, and it's easier to convince people to go to Oshkosh in the summer and get out of the Austin heat, So it was maybe a little bit of a win for them.
Yeah, no doubt. So once you really got that territory going, how did it perform?
It performed really well. We actually stood that up, and then within about a month, we had another opportunity in Toledo, Ohio, that came our way. Again, like I said, we didn't have a real specific approach at the very beginning, besides kind of that shotgun approach, and so the Toledo opportunity came right on the heels of that. So that was a pretty busy summer for us in 2020. Not only was COVID happening, but we opened 2 terminals back to back. And the Toledo operation was actually one where there were no drivers in place, and it was about 13 to 15 routes per day, again, depending on the day. So that one that one is a lot heavier lifting in that area to get that one up and running.
So how did you do that? When I try to put myself in the headspace of a contractor, it seems relatively straightforward to think about taking over an existing business that has a BC in place, has a staff of drivers. I mean, you're really just talking about a transfer of ownership of a machine that's already running well. But thinking about a new territory in an area that you are not near, again, you're remote, that doesn't have any drivers already on staff. What does that process actually look like? How much time does FedEx give you to actually get that up and running? Because it can't be overnight. You have to find drivers and hire them and think about getting trucks. There's infrastructure within your own company that you have to have in place before you're showing up every morning and delivering all the packages that need to go out. What does that process actually look like?
Yeah, it looks a little bit different for each one, obviously, again, because all the situations are a little bit different. That being said, there's a playbook that we usually run, right? And so, first of all, you need to have, in my opinion, a good management team put together, right? Because we need to make sure, again, as I tell all of my guys and we tell all the senior managers, within the FedEx terminals, we can't fail in any of the terminals that we're currently at as we're expanding, right? If that happens, ruins our reputation. We're not going to get new opportunities. And, we put our business at risk of losing the opportunities that we currently have. So it's really putting a good plan in place, making sure that that we're comfortable, right? Doing those two terminals back to back was probably a little bit much. After that, we turned down a handful of opportunities, again, knowing that we needed to kind of digest what we had in place. So it wasn't probably still a little sooner than what we wanted, but about 3 or 4 months later, we picked up another opportunity in Terre Haute, Indiana. So in October, we did that. But again, I think it's understanding the opportunities, understanding what goes into it, having that good team in place. We had a deep bench of really good drivers in Austin that before we started expanding, we started talking to about the potential to travel and be able to go to these new locations. And so typically what we do is we send one of our traveling managers, regional managers, up to an area for a week or so beforehand. We'll go and get a handful of traveling drivers that are committed to go, 2 to 4 weeks and go up to an area. And then really at that time, it's making sure that you have a really good plan and good communication in place with FedEx themselves. They are pretty lenient when it comes to standing up in these new areas, especially when you're taking over for an area that has been failing for a while. They're generally happy to get someone in there who they hope to be stable, hope to do a good job. And so, with the Toledo, so Oshkosh, for example, we basically said, hey, we'll take over all the routes from day one, essentially. Because again, we had the majority of the drivers in place. We were able to send a couple extra up to handle things. And it was a pretty smooth transition. That if I look back, that first week was probably a little bit rough, but not too bad. The Toledo operation, again, being a little bit larger and then not having any drivers in place, really it was going and talking to FedEx and putting a really good plan in place with them and saying, okay, here's the thing. We've got X amount of routes we need to take over, and we commit to taking over, 2 routes a week for the next, 4 to 6 weeks. And just let them know that this is what we're doing and keep them on track, right? Say, hey, if we were able to hire people a little bit faster than we thought, we'll go and accelerate that. Or if you start really running into some hiring problems, just say, hey guys, we're really, really working hard on hiring people. I think we're still going to hit that 6-week ramp, for example. But, for week 2 and 3, we might need a little bit extra help still. So it's really just having that open communication with them and helping them understand where you are and that you're doing your best, right? What we have found, again, FedEx, they don't want us to fail, right? They want us to do a good job. They want us to be able to handle these routes, handle the areas, things like that. And so again, they'll be as lenient as possible as long as they see that you are working hard, you're communicating well. And when you do make mistakes, you fix them as quickly as you can. And that's what we feel typically works well when we stand up these areas.
So how does FedEx get the packages delivered? Are they typically utilizing contingency work from other contractors nearby until you ramp up, whether it's 4 weeks or 6 or 8 weeks, however long that takes you as the new contractor?
Yeah, so again, in most of these areas, because they haven't been performing well, FedEx is already utilizing contingency drivers in a lot of cases. Again, whether it's from contractors within the building or from outside. And so they kind of already have it baked into their plan. They're already doing it. And again, what we're trying to do is ease them away from that over a certain period of time, right? And again, some areas they're going to give you a longer ramp than others. Some senior managers will, again, we've had some where it's like, hey, you've got to hit the ground running day one. And that's going to be, that's a little bit different, right? And we just have to understand going into it what it looks like, right? So again, that we could be successful and FedEx could be successful. And again, we have had some areas where they really want everyone up and running right away. And at that point in time, we say, okay, well, we got to start hiring 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time, getting drivers hired, even if they don't really have a route to run yet. We have to get some extra travel drivers up there, a little bit earlier, things like that. And so again, as we've been able to grow, we've been able to develop a little bit deeper bench, right, to be able to handle some of these opportunities if they do say hit the ground running from day one. But again, we push back on that as much as we can, right, to be able to say, hey, let's go and put a good plan together. And again, if it's reasonable, it's usually something that both parties can agree on.
Yeah, and that communication with FedEx is key, just like you had mentioned. So you got started in North Austin, Wisconsin, Toledo, Ohio, Terre Haute, Indiana, and that was all in 2020. Those three. No,
that was all in 2020. It was a busy 2020. Not even counting just throwing COVID in the middle of all of that, right? So yes, we grew quite a bit. If we knew COVID was going to be how it was in 2020, maybe we wouldn't have expanded quite as quickly. But hindsight's always 2020. But we survived. We made it through peak of 2020 somehow. I'm not exactly sure how. I drove a little bit more that year than I had ever had in the past. So again, we survived, but it was definitely a growing year. But again, during that year, we also turned down quite a few opportunities too, right? Just knowing that if we took on too much, it would break us and break our system. And that's something that we didn't want to do, obviously.
Yeah, Jason, I want to go back to something that you just talked about a few moments ago. I was just talking to a contractor, and I'll leave their name out and the details out. But this is a contractor who was doing really well with their terminal. They've been in the business for a while. They had actually achieved gold status. So that's really the top recognition level that FedEx introduced recently. I don't know what percentage of contractors hit that, but it's a small percentage. So doing a great job, really from all angles. And then this contractor took on a distressed area in a separate terminal that was kind of nearby them, and things are not going well. There's been communication issues with terminal management, and he is now at risk not only of losing the new terminal area, but losing his entire contract, because it negatively, if you don't perform in one area, it negatively impacts your reputation, and it can threaten your ability to continue contracting, period, even in the old area where he was already doing great. So I think that really just underscores, obviously people want to grow. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew. How do you think about that level of risk? I mean, you've got a successful business going. There might be some people who say, why would you try to move into a new area that's distressed? And if you mess it up, I mean, it could threaten your livelihood or the rest of your business. How do you think about risk from that type of perspective when you're looking at these opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be really careful. And again, when in 2020, when we were growing, FedEx hadn't pushed as many of the efficiencies into their contracts as they have now. And so I think the contracts were probably, in my mind, a little bit friendlier, right? So it was probably a little easier to make a couple mistakes along the road. Since then it's been a lot tighter, right? I think most contractors can agree that it's if you are not on your A game, you will not make money or lose money very quickly within the FedEx contracting model. So again, I think first and foremost, it comes down to having a really, really good team you can trust and lean on. I've been very blessed to be able to put together a wonderful team that's enabled us to do these opportunities and take them on. But I think it's also realizing a couple other things. One, understanding what that new terminal's like when you're going to go into it. There have been a handful of opportunities that contracts looked pretty good. The areas looked good, but once we started digging into a little bit more on maybe some of the management styles within that terminal, and then even the way contractors dealt with each other, we've actually walked away from a few areas, right? Because it just sounded, it's a large system, right? There's bound to be some toxic areas, and for whatever reason it is. The second thing we've noticed, and again, I don't have deep data on this, right? So this is just us from what we've seen, but I think there are areas within the FedEx system that FedEx engineering is undervaluing consistently. And so you see these areas where there's distressed contractors, and they'll just burn through contractors over and over and over again. And I'm not going to name terminals, but if you've been looking at FedEx or Build a Ground Biz over the last 3 or 4 years, there are certain terminals that pop up over and over again. And I wouldn't even say that that's necessarily a terminal management issue. I think it's more of a engineering issue where the engineers are just undervaluing these contracts, and the contractors can't survive. And all they need is one contractor to think they can, right? And that contractor comes in, they survive as long as they can, and then they either lose enough money they have to walk away, or the FedEx asks them to leave because they can't keep up with the volume on the number of drivers and things that they're doing. So honestly, and I've talked to quite a few FedEx people about this, I think there are, and I don't think it's across the board, right? But I think there are definitely areas that you see contractors that just get burned through all the time. And I think a lot of that could be a factor of engineering undervaluing it. So when you go into these areas and you look at the contracts and FedEx, the values that they give you, you have to really, really be comfortable with your numbers and the numbers you think you can operate these things at, how many drivers, fuel, insurance, all those kinds of things, right? Because again, margins are tighter nowadays. And if you're not really looking at that bottom line as you take over an area, it's not going to be profitable. And again, then that's when you start running into problems. It's either I lose money and get everything serviced, or I don't service everything and make a little bit of money. And either way is not the optimal scenario.
Now, Jason, you come from a background, again, where you have an accounting degree, you had experience in the corporate world, and then you went even beyond that with your education, and you got a master's in business administration, an MBA. I think that would qualify you, at least in my book, as being a sophisticated business owner, insofar as it goes owning FedEx contracts. You're talking about being able to really look at the numbers of a business and have an understanding as to not only how the business works, but how that will translate through your personnel costs, I'm sure you're looking at CapEx for the trucks. You're probably modeling out every step of the way before you ever show up on day one, before you ever even decide if you want to go into a new area. So you have that background and skill set. Do you feel like that's a necessary skill set to have if someone is thinking about getting into this business today in 2023?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you necessarily need to have an accounting degree or an MBA or anything along those lines, but I think you need to be comfortable with numbers, with spreadsheets, with financials, right? Again, it's a very financially driven business. All we do are operations, right? So we have to make sure those operations are tight and that the numbers make sense. We have no ability to make up for those mistakes by selling more, by cutting marketing, any of that kind of stuff, right? So we only have a couple levers that we can really pull, and it's really understanding those levers and understanding how those interact with the contracting model and being comfortable with that, right? Again, I don't think you need a degree in it. I think it's something that anyone can learn, but it's something that you have to have a good grip on and make sure that you're comfortable with it.
And it is something that makes the FedEx contracting business unique, like you had just mentioned. If you have an off week, you don't get that back. And there's no option just to go out the following week and rally your team and say, hey, we need to sell twice as much this week. You're going to get the packages, for the most part, you're going to get the packages that you're going to get. And so the job of the contractor is to get those packages delivered as efficiently and safely as possible, and really just keep your costs low and run efficiently.
Yeah.
So tell us more. Wisconsin, Toledo, Terre Haute, that was all in 2020. Busy year on top of COVID and everything else. And then 2021.
Yeah, 2021, we expanded into Palm Springs, California, Madison, Wisconsin, and then actually had a relationship with a contractor in southern Utah to the Hurricane Station who was who I knew from family members. Anyway, he was looking to retire, so we ended up purchasing his operation out there. So that was the first operation that we had purchased versus just taking over open areas. But yeah, so 2021 was busy, not quite as busy as 2020, but still fairly busy.
So the Palm Springs and Madison, Wisconsin opportunities, again, those were going on Build a Ground Biz and just looking for open areas that you'd be able to move into.
Yeah.
Jason, do you feel like that's a strategy that's underutilized? I mean, I hear a lot, especially these days, I hear a lot of contractors constantly buying and selling the rights to CSAs. And maybe it's just something that I don't hear about quite as much, but obviously it's happening. Do you feel like the strategy of just going on Build a Ground Biz and looking for areas that you won't have to fork out a bunch of money to buy the rights and take on an SBA loan or just have a lot of blue sky on your financials? Do you feel like that's being underutilized by contractors today?
I mean, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I talk to quite a few contractors whenever we have a chance to get together. And again, I hear people talking about both. I'm not sure if it's necessarily underutilized, but it is definitely a different skill set, right? I think raising money or getting loans and purchasing businesses that are already established, I think that can work very well, and it's worked very well for a lot of contractors. And I think that's a certain skill set, right, of being able to get money together and raise money. It's a completely different skill set in a lot of ways, I think, to be able to go into an open area and start out, right? So again, we have costs that are going to be that are still there, right? So it's not necessarily, I mean, FedEx awards it to us for free, but again, that for the first month, you still have to be comfortable knowing that, hey, I'm probably going to spend an extra $50,000 to $100,000 over what I get from FedEx on travel drivers, on renting trucks until we get our step vans in place, renting hotel rooms, all these types of things, right? So there is an outlay of cash from the very beginning. So you have to be comfortable with that and have, some cash on the side, or have enough cash that your main business is kicking off that you can utilize that as you grow and expand, which we've been able to do. But again, I think it's something that works well. And I know a lot of people who have done it, but it's a different, you have to be uncomfortable in different ways, right, to be able to go and do it. And it's not necessarily for everyone, but those who are able to do it, I think it's a great strategy.
So 2016 through 2021, and in the COVID years of 2020, 2021, those were boom years. I mean, e-commerce volume absolutely surged because, even if you weren't someone who was used to shopping on Amazon at that point, you became one, more likely than not. And then 2022 came, and I've had a lot of other contractors tell me that 2022 was a tough year. Inflation really hit the business hard with fuel. The cost of fuel went way up. Wages, it was tough to find drivers because there were so many places that were hiring, and that put a lot of pressure on wages. And a lot of those costs increased and really outpaced any increases that contractors may have been able to get through contract renegotiations, things like that. What was 22 like for you?
I mean, I think you described it for me too. So, I mean, I think it was really about the same as all the other contractors. 2022, and again, especially with some of these contractor events that were held and talking to different people, and there were a lot of people out there who didn't make any money or who lost quite a bit of money, right? And it was a tough year, right? So, just like with a lot of different businesses, a lot of different industries, there's definitely cycles, and it's one of those that if you weren't prepared for 2022 financially and having a little bit of extra working capital on the side, it was definitely a tough year. But we ran into all the same problems, the same things. We definitely had to tighten our belts a lot more. We had to push our drivers a lot harder, really, really work on efficiencies as much as we could. Again, talking to our managers and saying, hey, let's see, if we're running, 70 routes total for a whole entire week, right? Let's see if we can cut that back to 65. Let's try to do these little things and work around the edges to be able to be a little bit more profitable. But it was a tough year, and I think I feel like FedEx has recognized that. We're at the Gold event this last month out in Pittsburgh for one of our contracts, and they seem to wanted to express that desire that they recognize that it was a rough year, right, and that it was hard for us, and probably not the best communication between FedEx and the contractors too during that year also, and so again, I think we did run into a lot of the same things that probably all the contractors you've talked to ran into.
Did you manage to grow your operation anymore in 2022?
A little bit. We only started one additional contract that was in Champaign, Illinois, in 2022. Yeah, 2022 was mostly just try to survive and make it through the year.
Which you did. And here we are in 23. So Jason, tell us about the current state of your business. First of all, have you expanded into any new stations, in the first 4 months of this year so far?
We have not expanded yet this year. We've been in negotiations on a few. A couple of them, again, the contracts just were not very good. They didn't seem very good based off of our numbers. And a couple that we still have, we have some irons in the fire still for a few others. So hopefully we'll pick up a contract or two. I mean, that's really our goal. Our goal as a company would be to probably try to pick up 2 open areas a year. I think that's doable, and with the people that we have, we're able to do that. But yeah, I haven't picked up anything yet so far.
So you're running a fairly large and scaled operation. Again, Austin, Wisconsin, Toledo, Ohio, Terre Haute, Indiana, Palm Springs, Madison, Wisconsin, Utah, Champaign, Illinois. Tell us how is your company structured today? You told us in the early days you had, really the one BC you started with who was really awesome. And I think that was the one who you had promoted into more of a regional management position. But do you have other regional managers? How's your company structured?
Yeah, so I mean, we've definitely had to add a lot more corporate overhead over the last few years. So we hired a COO a couple years back, who's been a lifesaver. He's been awesome. So really, again, during 21, 22, and coming into 23, I mean, without him, I don't know if we would have survived, honestly, to knowing, just seeing how much we grew and trying to stay on top of things and really making sure that we're running efficiently in all of our operations. So we have him. We have a regional manager. We have another traveling manager who, again, helps out when we need it. We have, again, traveling drivers within each station, contingency drivers, however you want to call them, that run normal routes, right, on a daily basis. But we know that if we need to go and leverage them and use them to open up places, we can do that. We've had to hire a lot more. We have a part-time accountant now. We have a couple hiring managers, things like that. So we've definitely had to add those, again, a lot of that corporate overhead that, again, if you're just running one operation, you don't need it. I did the majority of that beforehand. But again, as you get to a certain size, you definitely need that help. I think you have to realize that you can't do everything on your own anymore.
Yeah, so let's talk about hiring. So you have a hiring manager or 2 hiring managers, I think it was. Do you utilize any recruiting services, or are you just posting on Indeed? How are you recruiting? Which is a constant thing. I mean, especially at a business of your size and scale, I'm sure that you always need to be recruiting and hiring. How do you handle that?
We have an ad posted somewhere all the time. So we have 2.5 people over hiring right now. We have a part-timer also. But yes, always hiring. We always have to be hiring somewhere. And again, in some of our larger operations, we're generally always hiring, right? Just knowing that we need to have people in the pipeline. Because again, if 1 or 2 people quit, you've got to have people ready to jump in. Mostly, I mean, not even mostly, I'd say 95% of it's Indeed. We do try to work with our drivers and give them, bonuses, things like that. If they recommend other drivers for us and we hire them, things like that. So there are hiring bonuses for things like that, but it's almost all Indeed. We've tried some of these third-party services, and maybe it's just us, but we have not had much luck with them, to be honest. We felt like, and again, it's probably, I'd say it's a credit to the people we've been able to hire, that the folks that we have, they're able to hire and onboard people faster than some of these third-party services that we've utilized in the past.
So, your business is pretty spread out again. We talked about hiring. Jason, tell us about what are some other things that you're doing today that you feel like a lot of other contractors aren't doing, that you feel like other contractors might be missing the boat on?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Again, I think, as I talk to most contractors, I think most of them know what they're doing. They work hard. I think they know their businesses and things like that. One thing I would say, so I get lots of phone calls from people who are interested in getting into the FedEx space. And so maybe we'll go the that side, right? Versus, what current contractors are doing. But as I talk to people who are wanting to get into the space, they always talk about, oh, I hear that's a wonderful business. So it's a great opportunity, absentee ownership, things like that. And I always kind of pause on that part, right? Whenever they talk about absentee ownership, you don't have to live in the area that you have contracts, right? But you cannot be an absentee owner. Like if as soon as you let your foot off the gas and you are not following up on your BC, making sure that they have good goals in place, that you're checking on efficiencies, staying on top of safety, you get into trouble real fast. And we've noticed that even in our operation, right, where I think we do a good job at it. But there have been some locations where our BCs have started slipping and we didn't correct it quick enough, right? And we started running into some issues. So really, again, we can't be absentee. That doesn't mean that you have to work 40 hours a week on it, right? You can still go and have it be kind of like a part-time gig, I would say, in a lot of cases. But definitely you have to be on top of it all the time. And so really the thing we focus on the most, besides safety, obviously, is that efficiency piece, right? Making sure that we're doing everything we can to maximize the resources we have and make sure that we are cutting routes where we can cut routes. And again, one or two here and there, throughout the week adds up to be a lot over a 52-week period of time. And so again, it's really just staying on top of those little things and making sure that you don't let any of that slip.
About how many routes are you running on a daily basis at this point?
Oh, that's a good question. 160 to 170 probably okay. on kind of the heavier days.
Now, you just mentioned, obviously, we've talked a lot about efficiency, but you had also just mentioned safety. What is your safety program in your company?
Yeah, it's probably fairly similar to most contractors, right? So we make sure that all of our equipment has all the safety features that are required by FedEx, right? So we have the vetter, have all the cameras. As we buy new trucks, we make sure that we have sonar, things of that nature. We try to go and give these drivers as many tools as possible that help them out. Again, these are big trucks, right? It's hard. It's hard backing up a big truck. It's hard to be able to see all these things, right? So, we try to make sure that they have the tools in place. But really, it comes down to trying to establish a culture from the very beginning. So we've spent a lot of time on our employee handbook and our safety handbook. As we hire drivers, we really try to help them understand before they even start driving what's expected of them. It's a lot easier to go and tell someone that they're doing something right or wrong if they know what the expectations are from the very beginning. And so again, it's making sure that they understand that, again, we don't tolerate unsafe drivers. We know that there are going to be accidents, with this many drivers and this many miles, it just happens, right? You're going to have it, but it's really trying to reduce those as much as possible. We have weekly meetings with all of our BCs to go over safety. They have weekly meetings with all of their drivers. We utilize a lot of the same technology that some of these other contractors do. So we use Ground Cloud. And we have it set up to where on a weekly basis, the drivers have to watch a video or two, answer questions. Again, we try to talk about it all the time, make sure it's top of mind. And again, then you keep your fingers crossed as they all drive out into the world and deliver, thousands of packages and hope that nothing bad happens.
Yeah, the safety component is so important, especially with the implementation of Schedule L. I hear a lot of people talk about Schedule L, and there's trade-offs to it. I talk to plenty of contractors who are making extra money quarterly because they have a good position, good safety record within Schedule L. And then there's a lot of other contractors out there where it's hurting them because they've had too many incidents. And there's some different formula. There's a formula as to how that's exactly measured in different tiers related to Schedule L. But safety can definitely make or break you. Jason, what are, if you were to go back, to the beginning and kind of relive your career in FedEx as you're coming up, what are some things that you would probably do differently if you had another shot at the entire thing from then to today?
Yeah, I think we would have from the very, and not that we didn't look at efficiencies from the very beginning, but I think if we would have even, from again 2016, really, really, really tightened up as many of those efficiencies as we could from the very beginning, I think we'd be even in a better place than we are now. So I think that's kind of one of those first things that I would do over again. And second, I probably would have looked to expand a little bit sooner than 2020. We probably would have looked into 2018 or 2019 once we had a good business plan in place to go and grow the business.
Now, is that because of just the way that things happened to work out with COVID, that you would have been in a better position to capitalize on all of the commerce growth, or do you just mean kind of philosophically, if you're in a position to grow, don't wait?
In my opinion, it's probably the latter, right? If I were able to grow, I would grow as soon as I could, right? Again, looking back on it. That being said, I think it would have enabled us to probably capture some more of that growth that was available in 2020. Again, looking back, I think everything's worked out well for us, and we're happy with where we are. But again, there's always little things that we could change or little things we do different.
Shifting gears a little bit, Jason, how are you looking at the possible Ground and Express merger type of situation? And there's more to it than that. There's other companies that FedEx is going to be, consolidating their efforts in the coming years. But really, the main one that affects probably everyone listening to this podcast is the Express and Ground. Are you operating in any stations that have already started to take on Express volume, and how are you viewing that going forward?
Yeah, we are not in any terminal that is doing Express yet or has it, in the short-term horizon. For better or worse, I think I'm a fairly optimistic person, and my viewpoint is, give me the volume, pay me for it, and we'll figure it out from that point. I believe that FedEx has a good plan in place. I hope that they have a good plan in place. Again, I'm happy to take all the volume. I hope that they understand that, part of it, that yes, we know that we'll get a little denser, obviously, but hopefully they understand too that it's going to slow us down a little bit too in a lot of cases, right? So it's having a belief and faith that FedEx is going to do things the right way and understand that they're looking to save costs, obviously, right? That's why they're doing all this, but I hope that they share some of those cost savings with us as they ask us to do some of these, on-time deliveries, things like that. I think it's going to be fine, right? In the almost 7 years, things are quite a bit different, right? When I first started, it was 5-day-a-week operations. You can have 1 or 2 routes, whatever it is. Right now, now we're back down to 6 days in most places again, right after going to 7 days. But things are constantly changing. That's one thing that probably my wife and I saw the most when we were working for large corporations, is they always seem to be changing something, right? And so I think we just have to be flexible and nimble and ready to take on those opportunities. But I'm excited about it. Again, give me the volume, and hopefully they'll pay us the right way for it, and I'll take it, right? Because that just gives us new opportunities to grow and expand.
The business has changed tremendously. I've been, involved with working with FedEx contractors since 2011, and I want to say it was 2014. I actually visited both terminals in Austin, Texas. Yeah. And it was a completely different ball game back then. I remember there was a contractor who had one van, and he had recently bought a Ram ProMaster. That was his van. He showed up and drove it every day, and he was really stoked because he hit a deer, and the plastic paneling, he just popped it off and replaced it. He was so excited it didn't mess up his truck any more than that. But that's awesome. It's certainly, things have certainly changed since then.
Now it's fun. It's fun to talk to some of these old contractors and see the growth that they've had. And again, that's, I think, one of the beauties of the FedEx model, right? Is you see these people, 10, 20 years ago who had a vision of like, hey, I'm going to start driving around. And now, they have 20, 30, 40, 100 routes. I mean, that's a pretty amazing story and a pretty amazing opportunity for hundreds and thousands of people out there.
So Jason, what's your plan from here? You've grown a sizable operation. You'd mentioned you're putting out roughly, varies, but roughly 160 routes daily. And you've grown substantially since 2016. Are you planning to do this for another 10 years, 20 years, or what are you looking at from here?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm bullish on the FedEx model, right? I think, again, this is something that it feels like they're putting all their eggs in the FedEx contractor basket. Especially combining express and ground together. So I'm bullish on FedEx. Again, maybe that's my optimistic nature, and maybe it'll be my downfall here in the next few years. But we plan on doing this long term. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're always looking to pick up new opportunities. A couple a year is optimal for us, I think, right now. And there's other opportunities that we'd like to get into. We've started dabbling in line haul, looking into that. So we hope this year we start growing into line haul and starting kind of different business that way, things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going anywhere, and so I'm hoping here I'll be here in another 10 years or so, and things are still going well for us.
Jason, I want to be mindful of our time. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about before we sign off?
No, not that I can think of. I appreciate your time and letting me come on and talk.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and our listeners do as well. And we'll keep in touch. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Ryan.
Routing for Success is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. In today's competitive market, it is essential to acquire the right trucks at a fair price and finance them in a way that makes sense for your business. Leveraging their extensive network of truck and van suppliers, the experts at AP Equipment Financing will help you locate the best deals on step vans, cutaways, panel vans, and more. Deliver them straight to your facility and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description or visit apfinancing.com for more information. Routing for Success is an independent production of AP Equipment Financing and is in no way affiliated with or endorsed by FedEx Corporation, FedEx Ground, Amazon, or any other logistics company discussed herein. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Routing for Success.